German Shepherd was found sleeping in a broken pot. What baby did next left? Everyone in tears. What happened next will shock you. A discovery that changed everything for a family happened in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The story you're about to listen to will leave you speechless. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the quiet streets of Cedar Hills, a small town where neighbors still waved from their porches and children played until the streetlights came on. In a modest blue house at the end of Maple Street, 5-year-old Eli sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, building towers with wooden blocks that would inevitably crash down. His mother, Sarah, watched from the doorway with a mixture of love and concern etched across her tired face. Eli hadn't spoken a word in 3 months, not since the accident that took his father away on a rainy Tuesday evening. The doctor said it was selective mutism, a response to trauma. They assured Sarah it would pass, but each silent day felt like watching her little boy disappear piece by piece. His bright blue eyes, once full of chatter and questions, now held a distant look that broke her heart every morning. "Breakfast is ready, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him. Eli looked up, nodded, and carefully placed his last block on top of the tower. He never knocked them down anymore. Everything had to stay perfect, untouched, safe. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local clinic, but she'd taken extended leave to be with Eli. Money was tight, but her son needed her more than anything else right now. The house felt too quiet without her husband's laughter echoing through the halls, without Eli's endless stream of "why, mommy?" and "look what I did." After breakfast, Eli wandered to the back door, as he did every morning. Their backyard was small, but filled with Sarah's attempt at a garden, vegetables growing in neat rows, and flowers blooming in mismatched pots. An old wooden shed stood at the far end, weathered and leaning slightly to one side. Sarah's husband had promised to fix it before everything changed. "Stay where I can see you," Sarah called softly, though she knew Eli never wandered far. He was different now, cautious about everything, as if the world had become too dangerous to explore. Eli stepped onto the back porch, his bare feet touching the cool morning grass. The sun felt warm on his face, and for a moment, he almost smiled. Almost. He walked slowly toward the garden, his small hands trailing along the fence posts, when something caught his eye near the old shed. Behind the shed, partially hidden by overgrown weeds, sat a large terracotta pot. It had once held Sarah's prized tomato plant, but it had cracked during the winter and been forgotten. Now, as Eli approached, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The pot wasn't empty. Curled inside the broken container, looking like he was trying to disappear from the world, lay a German Shepherd. But this wasn't the kind of dog you'd see in movies or at the park. This dog was thin, so thin that his ribs showed through his matted, dirty fur. His coat, which should have been golden brown and black, was dull and stained with mud and something that looked like dried blood. Eli froze, his small body trembling. The dog's eyes were closed, and for a terrifying moment, Eli thought he might be dead. But then he saw the slight rise and fall of the dog's chest, shallow breaths that seemed to take enormous effort. The dog was sleeping, but it wasn't the peaceful sleep of a pet safe in his home. This was the exhausted sleep of something that had been running for too long, hiding for too long, hurting for too long. Eli had always been afraid of dogs, especially big ones. But looking at this broken creature, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not fear, but something else. Something that made his chest tight and his eyes water. Without thinking, without his usual caution, Eli took a step forward, then another. The dog didn't move. Eli could see now that there were cuts on the dog's legs, old wounds that had healed badly. Around his neck was a collar, but it wasn't like any collar Eli had ever seen. It was thick, metallic, and looked like it had been attached in a way that was never meant to come off. "Hello," Eli whispered, and the word surprised him. He hadn't meant to speak. He hadn't spoken to anyone in months, but somehow, looking at this hurt dog, the word just came out. The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, carefully, his eyes opened. They were the most beautiful eyes Eli had ever seen, amber-colored like honey in sunlight, but filled with a sadness that matched his own. For a long moment, boy and dog just looked at each other. Neither moved, neither made a sound. It was as if they were both holding their breath, afraid that any sudden movement might break this fragile moment. Then, so quietly that Eli almost missed it. The dog made a sound. Not a bark or a growl, but a small whimper, so soft it was barely audible. It was the sound of someone who had been alone for too long, someone who had forgotten what kindness felt like. Eli's heart clenched. Without thinking about his mother's warnings about strange dogs, without thinking about his own fears, he took another step forward and slowly, very slowly, reached out his small hand. The dog watched him, those amber eyes never leaving Eli's face. When Eli's fingers were just inches away, the dog lifted his head slightly and touched his nose to the boy's palm. His nose was warm and wet, and Eli felt something inside his chest crack open, like ice melting after a long winter. "You're hurt," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. The dog's tail gave the smallest wag, just the tip moving back and forth. It was such a small gesture, but it said everything. "I'm here, I see you. I'm not going anywhere." Eli sat down in the grass beside the broken pot, his legs folding beneath him. The dog watched him carefully, as if trying to decide whether this small human could be trusted. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the dog slowly, painfully, lifted his head and rested it on Eli's lap. The weight of the dog's head was warm and comforting. Eli had never felt anything like it. He placed his small hand on the dog's head, fingers sinking into the matted fur, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. "What's your name?" Eli asked softly. The dog's eyes closed, and his breathing became deeper, more relaxed. For the first time in what might have been weeks, he felt safe enough to truly rest. Inside the house, Sarah was washing dishes when she glanced out the kitchen window to check on Eli. What she saw made her drop the plate she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but she barely noticed. Her son, her silent, withdrawn son, was sitting in the grass talking to a dog. Actually talking. She could see his lips moving, could see the gentle way he was stroking the animal's head. And the dog, this large, imposing German shepherd, was lying completely still, completely trusting. Sarah's first instinct was panic. A strange dog, especially one this size, could be dangerous. What if it was aggressive? What if it was sick? What if it hurt Eli? But as she watched, she saw something that stopped her cold. Eli was smiling. Not the forced smile he gave her when she asked if he was okay, but a real smile. The first real smile she'd seen since his father died. She opened the back door carefully, not wanting to startle either the dog or her son. "Eli," she called softly. Both Eli and the dog looked up at her. The dog didn't move from Eli's lap, but his body tensed slightly, ready to run if necessary. His eyes, which had been soft and trusting with Eli, became wary, cautious. "It's okay, Mommy," Eli said, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Those were the first words he'd spoken to her in 3 months. He's hurt. He needs help. Sarah took a step closer, her nurse's training kicking in despite her fear. She could see now that the dog was in bad shape. Malnourished, injured, and wearing what looked like some kind of electronic collar that didn't belong on any pet she'd ever seen. "Eli, honey, I need you to come inside," she said gently. "We need to call someone who can help this dog properly." "No!" Eli's voice was sharp, more emotional than she'd heard it in months. "He's scared. He doesn't want to leave. Please, Mommy, he needs us." The dog lifted his head from Eli's lap and looked at Sarah. In those amber eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Intelligence, yes, but also a deep, profound sadness that reminded her of her own son's eyes. This wasn't just a lost pet. This was something else entirely. "Okay," she said softly, making a decision that would change everything. "Okay, we'll help him. But first, let me call Dr. Martinez. He'll know what to do." As Sarah pulled out her phone, she couldn't help but notice that Eli was still talking to the dog, his voice soft and soothing. The dog listened to every word, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. It was as if they understood each other in a way that went beyond words. But when Sarah tried to call the veterinarian, she got an automated message. The clinic was closed due to flooding on the main road. The nearest emergency vet was 3 hours away, and Sarah's car had been making strange noises all week. "The vet's office is closed," she told Eli, who looked up at her with worried eyes. "We can't leave him here," Eli said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "He'll die if we leave him." Sarah looked at the dog again. Eli was right. This animal needed immediate care, and they were his only hope. Against every rational thought in her head, she made another decision that would change their lives forever. "We'll bring him inside," she said, "just until we can figure out what to do." Eli's face lit up with the brightest smile Sarah had seen in months. The dog seemed to understand too, his tail giving a weak but grateful wag. Getting the dog inside proved to be more challenging than expected. He was weak and could barely stand, let alone walk. Sarah brought out an old wagon that had once been Eli's favorite toy, and together they carefully helped the dog climb in. The dog trusted them completely, which both warmed Sarah's heart and worried her. In her experience, dogs that trusted humans this easily had either been very well loved or very badly hurt. Looking at his condition, she feared it might be the latter. Once inside, Sarah spread old blankets on the living room floor while Eli sat beside the dog, continuing to talk to him in his soft, gentle voice. The dog never took his eyes off the boy, as if Eli was the most important thing in his world. "What should we call him?" Eli asked, looking up at his mother with bright eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart. He might already have a name." Eli looked thoughtful for a moment, then leaned down close to the dog's ear. "Are you Max?" he whispered. The dog didn't react. "Charlie?" Nothing. "Scout?" At the name Scout, the dog's ears perked up, and he lifted his head slightly, looking directly at Eli. His tail gave a small wag, and he made that soft, whimpering sound again. "Scout," Eli said with certainty. "His name is Scout." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The dog's reaction to the name was too strong to be coincidental. Scout wasn't just a random name Eli had chosen. Somehow, it meant something to this dog. But how could a 5-year-old boy know a strange dog's name? As if reading her thoughts, Eli looked up at her with those wise blue eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "He told me," he said simply. "He told me with his eyes." Sarah knelt beside them, her nursing instincts taking over. She needed to examine Scout's injuries, but she also needed to be careful. Despite his gentle behavior with Eli, she didn't know how he would react to being touched by a stranger. "Eli, can you keep talking to him while I look at his cuts?" she asked. Eli nodded seriously, understanding the importance of his job. He began telling Scout about his favorite toys, about the treehouse his daddy had been building before the accident, about how much he missed hearing bedtime stories. As Eli talked, Sarah carefully examined Scout's injuries. What she found made her stomach turn. These weren't the random cuts and scrapes of a dog who had been living rough. These were deliberate. Some looked like they might have been made by needles or medical instruments. Others looked like burns, as if someone had used electricity on him. But it was the collar that truly frightened her. It wasn't a normal dog collar at all. It was made of some kind of metal she didn't recognize, and it appeared to be permanently attached to Scout's neck. There were no buckles, no clasps, no way to remove it. It looked like it had been welded shut. Embedded in the collar were small lights that weren't glowing now, and what looked like a tiny screen that was dark. This wasn't a pet collar. This was some kind of device, and Sarah had a terrible feeling about what it might mean. "Mommy?" Eli's voice broke through her thoughts. "Is Scout going to be okay?" Sarah looked at her son, at the hope shining in his eyes, at the way Scout's breathing had become more relaxed just from being near Eli. She thought about the strange collar, about the deliberate injuries, about how this dog had appeared in their backyard, like he was running from something. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly, "but we're going to do everything we can to help him." As if understanding her words, Scout lifted his head and looked directly at Sarah. In his amber eyes, she saw something that chilled her to the bone. It wasn't just gratitude or trust, it was fear, deep, intelligent fear, as if Scout knew that whatever he was running from might not be far behind. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the trees. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life in Cedar Hills was about to change forever. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that bringing Scout inside might have been the most dangerous decision she'd ever made. But looking at Eli, seeing him smile and talk, and show more life than he had in months, Sarah knew she would make the same choice again. Sometimes, she thought, the most dangerous decisions were also the most necessary ones. Scout seemed to sense her thoughts. He lifted his head from Eli's lap and looked at Sarah with those knowing eyes, as if he was trying to tell her something important, something that would change everything they thought they knew about the world. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows, casting long shadows across the floor, where a broken boy and a broken dog had found each other. Neither Sarah nor Eli could have imagined, that this moment of peace was just the calm before a storm that would test everything they believed about love, loyalty, and what it meant to be family. 3 days passed like a dream Sarah never wanted to wake up from. Scout had transformed their quiet house into something that felt alive again. More importantly, he had transformed Eli. Her son, who had been silent for months, now talked constantly. Not just to Scout, though that's where most of his words went, but to Sarah too. He asked questions again, told stories, even laughed when Scout tried to catch his own tail and fell over in a dizzy heap. "Mommy, look!" Eli called from the living room, where Scout was performing what could only be described as magic tricks. Without any training from them, Scout had begun responding to commands that Eli never gave him. When Eli dropped his toy car under the couch, Scout retrieved it. When Sarah's pen rolled under the kitchen table, Scout brought it to her before she even asked. How does he know to do that? Sarah wondered aloud, watching Scout gently place her reading glasses in her hand. She hadn't even realized she'd been looking for them. "He's smart," Eli said, as if that explained everything. "Smarter than other dogs. He talks to me without words." Sarah had noticed Scout's unusual intelligence too. He seemed to understand not just commands, but conversations. When they talked about going to the store, Scout would position himself by the door. When they discussed bedtime, he would walk to Eli's room and wait. It was as if he understood English perfectly. But there were other things about Scout that worried Sarah. He never barked, not once in 3 days. He moved through their house like a ghost, his footsteps completely silent even on the hardwood floors. And sometimes, late at night, she would find him sitting by the front window, perfectly still, watching the street as if he was expecting someone. The strange collar around his neck remained a mystery. Sarah had examined it carefully while Scout slept, and what she found disturbed her even more. The metal wasn't just welded shut, it was seamless, as if it had been molded directly onto his neck. The small screen she'd noticed before flickered occasionally, with numbers and symbols she didn't recognize. And sometimes, very faintly, it would emit a soft beeping sound that made Scout's ears twitch nervously. "We should try to find his owners," Sarah said to Eli on Thursday morning, though the words felt wrong even as she spoke them. She didn't want to find Scout's owners. Watching Eli come back to life over the past 3 days had been like watching a miracle unfold. "He doesn't have owners," Eli said with the certainty that only children possessed. "He has us now." Scout looked up at both of them from his place on the living room rug, those amber eyes moving between mother and son, as if he was following their conversation perfectly. When Sarah met his gaze, she could swear she saw him shake his head slightly, as if agreeing with Eli. That afternoon, while Eli napped with Scout curled protectively beside him, Sarah decided to do some research. She took photos of Scout's collar and searched online for anything similar. What she found made her blood run cold. The closest match she could find was in an article about military working dogs and experimental tracking devices. But the devices in the article looked primitive compared to Scout's collar. His was sleeker, more advanced, like something out of a science fiction movie. She was about to close her laptop when another article caught her eye. Security breach at classified research facility. The article was brief, mentioning only that a facility 2 hours north of Cedar Hills had reported a containment failure 3 days ago, the same day Scout had appeared in their backyard. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the article again. Containment failure. Not a break-in, but something getting out. And the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. She looked toward Eli's room, where she could hear her son's quiet voice talking to Scout about his dreams. Whatever Scout was, wherever he had come from, he was helping Eli heal. Could she really risk that by digging deeper into questions that might not have answers she wanted to hear? The decision was made for her, an hour later, when someone knocked on their front door. Sarah had been in the kitchen preparing dinner when the sharp, authoritative knocks echoed through the house. Scout, who had been lying peacefully beside Eli's chair, was suddenly on his feet, every muscle in his body tense. His lips pulled back slightly, not quite a snarl, but close. For the first time since he'd arrived, Scout looked dangerous. "Who is it?" Eli whispered, sensing the change in Scout's behavior. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw a man in a black jacket standing on her porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of posture that screamed military or law enforcement. In his hand was a badge, though she couldn't read the details through the peephole. "Stay here," she told Eli quietly, then opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Williams with Animal Recovery Services," the man said, holding up his badge. We've had reports of a missing German Shepherd in this area. Large dog, brown and black coat, possibly injured. Have you seen anything like that?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear Scout's low growl, so quiet it was barely audible, but filled with unmistakable warning. "No," she lied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I haven't seen any dogs around here." Agent Williams smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Are you sure? This dog is very important to his owners. They're quite worried about him." "I'm sure," Sarah said firmly. "If I see anything, I'll let you know." The man nodded slowly, but he didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out a business card and slipped it through the gap in the door. "Here's my number. This dog is very valuable, and there's a substantial reward for his return. No questions asked." As soon as Sarah closed the door, Scout appeared beside her, moving with that same silent grace that had amazed her for days. But now, instead of seeming magical, it seemed trained, professional, military. Eli ran to them, his face pale with worry. Was that man looking for Scout? Sarah knelt down to her son's level, her mind racing. "Maybe, sweetheart, but Scout is safe with us." Scout pressed against Eli's side, and the boy wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "I won't let them take you," Eli whispered fiercely. "You're my family now." Sarah looked at the business card Agent Williams had given her. The logo looked official, but something about it felt wrong. She pulled out her phone and searched for animal recovery services. The website looked legitimate, but when she dug deeper, she found almost no information about the company. No history, no customer reviews, no real substance. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the timing of everything. Scout appearing the same day as the containment failure. Agent Williams showing up just days later. The advanced technology embedded in Scout's collar. It all pointed to something much bigger and more dangerous than a lost pet. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard a sound that made her heart stop. Footsteps on the porch. Quiet, careful footsteps that were trying not to be heard. Sarah slipped out of bed and crept to the window. In the moonlight, she could see two figures moving around her house. One was Agent Williams. The other was a woman in similar dark clothing. They were examining her windows, testing her doors, moving like professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Scout appeared beside her as if he had materialized from the shadows. He had been sleeping in Eli's room, but somehow he had sensed the danger and come to find her. His amber eyes reflected the moonlight, and when he looked at her, Sarah saw something that made her breath catch. Scout wasn't just intelligent. He was trained, highly trained, and right now, he was in full protective mode. The dog moved to the front door and positioned himself between it and the hallway that led to Eli's room. His body language had changed completely. This wasn't the gentle, loving companion who played with her son. This was something else entirely, something that had been designed to protect and defend. Sarah watched the figures outside for what felt like hours. They circled the house twice, spent several minutes examining her car, and at one point, one of them appeared to be taking photos. Finally, just before dawn, they disappeared. When morning came, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She couldn't stay here. Whatever Scout was, whatever those people wanted with him, her quiet life in Cedar Hills was over. She had to protect Eli, and that meant running. "Pack a bag," she told Eli over breakfast. "We're going on a trip." "Where are we going?" Eli asked, excitement lighting up his face. "To see Grandpa's old cabin," Sarah said, thinking of her father's hunting cabin deep in the mountains. It was isolated, off the grid, and most importantly, it was somewhere Agent Williams and his people wouldn't think to look. Scout seemed to understand what was happening. As Sarah packed their clothes, he followed her around the house, alert and watchful. When she went to get their important documents from the safe, Scout positioned himself by the front door like a guard. "He knows we're leaving because of those people, doesn't he?" Eli asked, stroking Scout's head. "Yes," Sarah said, deciding that honesty was better than lies. "Scout needs to stay safe, and so do we." They left Cedar Hills just after lunch, Sarah's car loaded with clothes, food, and everything they might need for an extended stay at the cabin. Scout rode in the back seat beside Eli, his head out at the window, ears alert for any signs of pursuit. The cabin was exactly as Sarah remembered it from her childhood, small, rustic, and surrounded by miles of forest. Her father had chosen the location specifically because it was isolated. The nearest neighbor was 20 miles away, and cell phone service was spotty at best. As they unpacked, Sarah noticed changes in Scout that amazed her. Away from the house, away from the threat those people represented, he seemed to relax in ways she hadn't seen before. He played with Eli in the woods, chasing squirrels and splashing in the small stream that ran behind the cabin. But he also remained alert, his ears constantly moving, listening for sounds that humans couldn't hear. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Eli made an observation that stopped Sarah cold. "Scout's getting better," he said, brushing the dog's now shiny coat. "He's not as skinny anymore." Eli was right. In just a week, Scout had gained weight and muscle. His coat was becoming thick and lustrous. The cuts and burns on his body were healing with remarkable speed. It was as if being away from whatever had hurt him was allowing his body to repair itself at an accelerated rate. But it was what happened next that truly shocked Sarah. Eli was brushing Scout's fur when his small fingers caught on something near the dog's collar. "There's something here," he said, feeling around the area where the collar met Scout's neck. Sarah came over to investigate and found what felt like a small flap of skin or fur that moved differently from the rest. When she pressed it gently, it opened like a tiny door, revealing a small compartment she had never noticed before. Inside was a thin piece of what looked like plastic film, folded multiple times to fit in the tiny space. Sarah carefully extracted it, her hands shaking. "What is it?" Eli asked, leaning in to look. The film was covered with symbols, numbers, and codes that meant nothing to Sarah, but it was clearly important. Important enough to be hidden in a secret compartment in Scout's collar. Important enough that people were willing to search houses and threaten families to get it back. "I don't know," Sarah said honestly, "but I think this is what those people are really looking for." Scout looked at the film in Sarah's hands, then at her face, then back at the film. His expression was almost human in its intensity, as if he was trying to communicate something crucial that he couldn't put into words. "Whatever this is," Sarah said, "it's the reason you were running, isn't it?" Scout's amber eyes met hers, and in them she saw confirmation and fear. Deep, intelligent fear that spoke of things he had seen, things he had experienced, things that no living creature should have to endure. That night, Sarah sat by the dying fire long after Eli and Scout had gone to sleep. She stared at the mysterious film, trying to make sense of the symbols and codes. She thought about Agent Williams and his fake badge. She thought about the containment failure at the research facility. She thought about Scout's impossible intelligence, his advanced collar, his trained behavior. Slowly, horribly, the pieces began to form a picture that made her stomach turn. Scout wasn't just a dog. He was something else. Something that had been created or modified in ways that shouldn't be possible. And the film hidden in his collar contained information that someone was willing to kill for. As if sensing her thoughts, Scout appeared beside her chair. He had left Eli's side to come to her, and when she looked down at him, she saw something in his eyes that broke her heart all over again. Gratitude. Pure, overwhelming gratitude that said more than words ever could. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a chance to be more than what they made me. Thank you for letting me love your son the way I was never allowed to love anyone." Sarah reached down and stroked his head, feeling the warmth of his fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Whatever Scout had been before, whatever had been done to him, right now he was just a dog who loved her son. A dog who had brought Eli back from the dark place where grief had trapped him. "We'll figure this out," she whispered to Scout. "Whatever it takes, we'll keep you safe." Scout's tail wagged once, a small gesture of hope in the darkness. But outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees with a sound like whispers. And somewhere in those whispers, Sarah could swear she heard the echo of footsteps, getting closer. Have you ever found something that completely changed your life? Tell us about it in the comments below. The sound that woke Sarah wasn't loud. In fact, it was the opposite of loud. It was the complete absence of the night sounds she had grown accustomed to at the cabin. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The forest had gone completely silent, as if every living creature was holding its breath. Sarah sat up in the old wooden chair where she had fallen asleep, the mysterious film still clutched in her hand. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. But it wasn't the darkness that frightened her, it was the silence. Scout was already awake, standing rigid by the front door. His ears were pointed forward, every muscle in his body tense with alertness. When he turned to look at Sarah, his amber eyes reflected the dying firelight, and she saw something there that made her blood run cold. Recognition. Scout knew that silence, and he knew what it meant. Moving as quietly as possible, Sarah crept to the window and peered through the curtains. At first, she saw nothing but the dark outline of trees against the starlit sky. Then, gradually, she began to notice shapes that didn't belong, shadows moving between the trees with purpose and precision, professional movements that spoke of military training and dangerous intent. They had been found. Sarah's mind raced. How was it possible? The cabin was miles from any main road, hidden deep in the forest. She had told no one where they were going, but somehow, Agent Williams and his people had tracked them down. Scout moved silently to Sarah's side, pressing against her leg. When she looked down at him, he was staring at his collar, then at her, then back at his collar. His message was clear. The collar wasn't just a restraint or a monitoring device. It was a tracking beacon. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. They hadn't escaped at all. Every step they had taken, every move they had made, had been monitored and reported back to whoever was hunting Scout. A soft sound from Eli's room made both Sarah and Scout freeze. Eli was talking in his sleep, his voice carrying the innocent chatter of a child lost in dreams. The sound was achingly normal in a situation that had become anything but normal. Scout looked at Sarah with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and she saw a decision being made. Without warning, he moved toward the back door of the cabin, pausing to look back at her. His message was unmistakable. He was going to leave. He was going to draw them away from Eli. "No," Sarah whispered, grabbing Scout's collar. The metal was warm under her fingers, and she could feel a faint vibration, like electronic components working just beneath the surface. "We stick together." Scout shook his head, an eerily human gesture that reminded Sarah once again that this was no ordinary dog. He gently pulled away from her grip and moved to Eli's bedroom door. For a long moment, he stood there, looking at the sleeping boy. His tail gave one small wag, and Sarah could swear she saw tears glinting in his amber eyes. Then he turned back to Sarah and did something that nearly stopped her heart. He spoke, not in words that she could understand, but in a series of soft whimpers and barely audible sounds that somehow conveyed meaning as clearly as human speech. He was saying goodbye. He was telling her to take care of Eli. He was thanking her for the only real home he had ever known. "Scout, no," Sarah breathed, but the dog was already moving toward the back door. That's when Eli appeared in his bedroom doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Mommy, what's wrong? Why is Scout sad?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. How could Eli know that Scout was sad? How could a 5-year-old boy read the emotions of a dog with such clarity? Scout froze when he saw Eli, his entire body language changing. The resignation that had filled his amber eyes was replaced by something fiercer, something that looked almost like determination. "They're coming for you, aren't they?" Eli asked, walking over to Scout and wrapping his small arms around the dog's neck. "The bad people who hurt you." Scout leaned into Eli's embrace, and for a moment, the dangerous situation outside seemed less important than the bond between a boy and his dog, but only for a moment. The sound of breaking glass from the front of the cabin shattered the illusion of safety. Agent Williams and his team weren't waiting any longer. They were coming in. Sarah's military father had taught her basic self-defense and emergency procedures, lessons she had hoped never to use. But as she heard heavy footsteps on the cabin's front porch, those lessons came flooding back. "Eli, get behind the couch," she whispered urgently. "Stay low and don't make a sound." But Eli didn't move. Instead, he looked up at Scout with those wise blue eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Can you talk to them? Can you make them understand that you're good now?" Scout's response was immediate and heartbreaking. He moved to place himself between Eli and the front door, his body language shifting into something Sarah had never seen before. This wasn't the gentle companion who had played in their backyard, or the intelligent animal who had performed tricks. This was a weapon, a highly trained, extremely dangerous weapon that had been designed for purposes Sarah didn't want to imagine. The front door exploded inward, and Agent Williams entered with 3 other people, all dressed in black tactical gear. They moved with the precision of a special forces unit, their weapons drawn and ready. "Stand down," Agent Williams called out, his voice echoing through the small cabin. "We know you're here. Send out the asset, and no one gets hurt." Asset. They weren't even calling Scout a dog anymore. He was an asset, a piece of property to be recovered. Scout's response was a low growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. It was the first sound of aggression Sarah had heard from him, and it was terrifying. Not because it was loud or threatening, but because it was controlled, professional, the growl of something that knew exactly how much damage it could do and was choosing not to do it. Yet. "I know you can understand me," Agent Williams continued, his voice carrying the tone of someone speaking to a subordinate. "You're malfunctioning. Your emotional conditioning has been compromised. Return to base for recalibration." Sarah felt sick. Emotional conditioning, recalibration. They were talking about Scout like he was a machine, not a living being capable of love and loyalty and choice. Eli stepped out from behind the couch, his small chin raised defiantly. "He's not malfunctioning," the boy said, his voice stronger than Sarah had heard it since his father's death. "He's free." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Free. Such a simple concept, but one that seemed to shock Agent Williams and his team. They had clearly never considered the possibility that their asset might choose freedom over obedience. "Son, you don't understand what that thing is," Agent Williams said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Sarah's skin crawl. "It's not a pet. It's a prototype. A weapon designed for specific military applications. It doesn't have feelings the way you think it does." "You're wrong," Eli said simply. "Scout loves me, and I love him." Scout moved closer to Eli, pressing against the boy's side. His amber eyes never left Agent Williams, but his posture had changed slightly. He was still ready for combat, but now he was also protecting something precious. "The asset has formed an inappropriate attachment," one of the other agents said, speaking into a radio device. "Recommend immediate extraction and complete memory wipe." Memory wipe. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to take Scout away, they were planning to erase everything that made him who he was. All his memories of Eli, of their home, of learning what it meant to be loved. "Over my dead body," Sarah said, stepping forward to stand beside her son. Agent Williams looked at her with cold eyes. "That can be arranged." The threat was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took Sarah a moment to process what he had actually said. These people, whoever they really were prepared to kill a mother and child to reclaim their property. That's when Scout made his decision. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment he was a gentle family pet, the next he was something out of a nightmare. He moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible, covering the distance between himself and the nearest agent in a single leap. But he didn't attack. Instead, he positioned himself perfectly to block the agent's line of sight to Eli and Sarah, while simultaneously placing himself within striking distance of all four intruders. It was a defensive position that spoke of extensive tactical training and combat experience. "Stand down, X-47, Agent Williams barked, using what was clearly Scout's military designation. "That's a direct order." Scout's response was to bare his teeth in a snarl that was purely feral. Whatever conditioning had once controlled him was completely broken. He was no longer X-47, the obedient weapon. He was Scout, and he was protecting his family. "He doesn't have to obey you anymore," Eli said, walking over to stand beside Scout. The boy placed his small hand on the dog's head, and instantly, Scout's aggressive posture softened slightly. He was still ready for battle, but Eli's touch had reminded him that he was more than just a weapon. Agent Williams raised his own weapon, pointing it directly at Scout. "Last warning, return with us voluntarily, or we'll take you by force." "What did you do to him?" Sarah demanded, her nurse's training helping her notice details the others might have missed. "Those scars, those burns, what kind of experiments were you running?" "Classified," Agent Williams replied curtly, "but since you're not going to be leaving this cabin alive, I suppose it doesn't matter what you know." The casual cruelty of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. These people weren't just government agents doing an unpleasant job. They were something else entirely. Something that viewed human life as expendable in pursuit of their goals. "You created him," Sarah said, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "You didn't train a dog. You created something new, something that was never supposed to exist." Agent Williams smiled, and it was the most chilling expression Sarah had ever seen. "Very good. X-47 is the result of 5 years of genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, and psychological conditioning. He represents the future of military technology. a perfect blend of animal instinct and artificial intelligence, capable of independent thought but programmed for absolute obedience. Except he's not obedient anymore, Eli pointed out, with the brutal honesty that only children possessed. A temporary malfunction, Agent Williams said, one that will be corrected during his reconditioning. What you're describing is torture, Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. You're talking about torturing a sentient being. It's not torture if the subject isn't technically alive, Agent Williams replied. X-47 is property, very expensive property that needs to be recovered. Scout's growl deepened, and Sarah realized that he understood every word of their conversation. He knew exactly what awaited him if these people succeeded in taking him back, and he knew that they were planning to kill her and Eli to cover up their secret. Why? Sarah asked, trying to buy time while her mind raced for options. Why create something like this? What could possibly be worth this much effort and suffering? Perfect soldiers, Agent Williams said, his eyes gleaming with fanatic enthusiasm. Soldiers who don't question orders, don't suffer from PTSD, don't require food or sleep or medical care. Soldiers who can think and adapt but never disobey. X-47 is just the prototype. When we perfect the process, we'll have an entire army. The horror of his words settled over Sarah like a suffocating blanket. They weren't just experimenting on animals. They were planning to create an army of modified creatures, beings who looked alive but were treated as property. He chose, Eli said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the adults' conversation. Scout chose to be free. That makes him alive, doesn't it? The question was directed at Agent Williams, but it was Scout who answered. He moved away from his defensive position and walked calmly over to where Agent Williams stood. For a moment, Sarah thought he was surrendering, returning to his handlers like a good little weapon. Instead, Scout sat down directly in front of Agent Williams and tilted his head slightly, studying the man with those impossibly intelligent amber eyes. When he finally moved, it was to do something that no one in the room expected. Scout began removing his own collar. Sarah had assumed the metal band was permanently attached, welded or fused to his neck in a way that couldn't be undone. But as she watched in amazement, Scout manipulated hidden catches and releases that no human would have been able to find. The collar came apart in sections, each piece falling to the cabin floor with metallic clanks that seemed to echo forever. Without the collar, Scout looked different, smaller somehow, but also more real, more alive. The electronic components that had been embedded in his neck were visible now, tiny ports and connections that spoke of surgical procedures and technological integration that made Sarah feel sick. Impossible, Agent Williams breathed, staring at the pieces of the collar scattered on the floor. The collar was designed to be permanent. He shouldn't be able to remove it. Maybe you didn't design him as well as you thought, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. Maybe some things can't be programmed or conditioned away. Scout stood up and walked back to Eli, pressing against the boy's side. But, Nambi... Now, without the collar's technology, he seemed more vulnerable, more like the injured, frightened dog who had appeared in their backyard, rather than the sophisticated weapon he had been revealed to be. Free will, Eli said, stroking Scout's head. That's what Daddy used to call it. The thing that makes people choose to be good, even when no one's watching. Agent Williams raised his weapon again, but this time there was uncertainty in his eyes. With or without the collar, X-47 is still government property, and now he's a security risk that needs to be eliminated. His name is Scout, Eli said firmly, and he's my friend. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Agent Williams and his team had the weapons and the training, but Scout had something they didn't understand, something that couldn't be programmed or controlled or bought. He had chosen his side, and he was willing to fight for it. The sound that broke the tension wasn't gunfire or shouting. It was the soft beep of a cell phone receiving a message. Agent Williams glanced down at his device, and Sarah saw his expression change from confident control to something that looked very much like fear. "What is it?" one of his team members asked. Agent Williams looked at the phone again, then at Scout, then at the pieces of the collar on the floor. "The data," he said slowly. When he removed the collar, it triggered a transmission. Everything we've been trying to keep classified just got uploaded to the internet. Sarah felt a surge of hope so strong it almost knocked her over. The film she had found hidden in Scout's collar hadn't just contained information, it had contained evidence. Evidence of the experiments, the torture, the illegal creation of weapons that were designed to look alive but be treated as property. "You mean," Sarah began. "I mean your pet just exposed the entire program to the world," Agent Williams said, his voice filled with rage and something that sounded like panic. 5 years of research, billions of dollars in funding, and the careers of everyone involved just went public. Scout looked up at Agent Williams with what Sarah could only describe as satisfaction. He had known exactly what removing the collar would do. He had chosen to sacrifice his own safety to expose the truth about what had been done to him and what was planned for others like him. "Smart dog," Eli said proudly, hugging Scout tight. But Agent Williams wasn't finished. "It doesn't matter," he said, raising his weapon one final time. "Dead witnesses can't testify." What happened next would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come, but it would also restore her faith in the power of choice, the reality of free will, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. What do you think Scout's biggest sacrifice really was? Share your thoughts below. The first shot never came. Instead, the sound that filled the cabin was something Sarah had never heard before and hoped never to hear again. It was the sound of helicopters, multiple helicopters, approaching fast and low through the mountain forest. Agent Williams's expression shifted from murderous rage to something that looked almost like panic. He pressed his finger to his earpiece, listening to a voice Sarah couldn't hear. Whatever he was being told, it wasn't good news. "Sir, we have multiple aircraft inbound," one of his team members reported. "Military transponders. They're not ours." Agent Williams lowered his weapon slightly, his face pale in the dim light of the cabin. "How is that possible? This operation is classified at the highest levels." Scout, still pressed against Eli's side, lifted his head as if he too could hear something the humans couldn't. His ears twitched, and for the first time since the confrontation began, his aggressive posture relaxed slightly. Whatever was approaching, it wasn't another threat. The sound of the helicopters grew louder, and through the cabin windows, Sarah could see powerful searchlights cutting through the darkness. The beams swept back and forth across the forest, clearly looking for something specific. "We need to go," Agent Williams said to his team. "Now." "What about the asset?" one of them asked. Agent Williams looked at Scout with undisguised hatred. "Leave him. With the data compromised, he's worthless to us now anyway." But as they moved toward the door, the lead helicopter settled into a hover directly over the cabin, its spotlight blazing down through the windows like artificial daylight. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker, clear and authoritative. "This is Colonel Martinez, United States Army Criminal Investigation Division. The area is surrounded. All personnel are to exit the structure with their hands visible and surrender immediately." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. Real military, real law enforcement. Whatever Scout's data transmission had revealed, it had brought the right people to help them. Agent Williams and his team exchanged glances that spoke of years of working together in situations exactly like this. They were calculating odds, planning escape routes, preparing for a fight they probably couldn't win. "Don't even think about it," Sarah said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "It's over." "It's never over," Agent Williams replied, but there was defeat in his voice now. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. X-47 wasn't the only prototype. There are others, and they won't all be as compromised as this one." Scout moved away from Eli and approached Agent Williams one final time. The man tensed, probably expecting an attack, but Scout simply sat down in front of him and stared up at his former handler with those impossibly intelligent amber eyes. For a long moment, the two looked at each other, predator and prey, creator and creation, slave and master. But now the roles were reversed, and both of them knew it. Scout lifted one paw and gently touched Agent Williams's hand. It wasn't an aggressive gesture or a threatening one. It was something else entirely. Forgiveness, perhaps. Or maybe just acknowledgement that they had both been prisoners of the same system in different ways. Agent Williams stared down at the paw touching his hand, and Sarah saw something crack in his expression. For just a moment, the cold professionalism slipped away, and she glimpsed the man underneath. Someone who had convinced himself that what he was doing was necessary, even noble. Someone who had forgotten that the weapons he created were also living beings capable of love and loyalty and choice. "He's not a machine," Eli said softly, walking over to stand beside Scout. "He never was." Agent Williams looked at Eli, then at Scout, then at the paw still resting gently against his hand. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What have we done?" The question hung in the air like a confession. Outside, the helicopters were landing, and Sarah could hear boots on the ground, voices calling orders, the organized chaos of a military operation in full swing. Agent Williams and his team surrendered without resistance. As they were led away in handcuffs, Agent Williams turned back once to look at Scout. The dog was sitting calmly beside Eli, watching his former captors leave, with an expression that seemed almost sad. "He forgave them," Eli said, as if reading Scout's thoughts. "Even after everything they did to him." Sarah knelt down beside her son and Scout, wrapping her arms around both of them. They had survived something that should have destroyed them, but somehow they were all still here, still together, still alive. Colonel Martinez entered the cabin a few minutes later, a tall woman with graying hair and the kind of steady presence that came from years of command experience. She looked around at the scattered pieces of Scout's collar, at the overturned furniture, at the family huddled together on the floor. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle despite the authority it carried. "We're okay," Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. How could anyone be okay after what they had just experienced? Colonel Martinez knelt down to Scout's level, studying him with professional interest, but also with something that looked like respect. "So, you're the one who broke the internet tonight?" she said. Scout tilted his head, and Sarah could swear he understood exactly what the colonel was talking about. "The data he transmitted," Colonel Martinez continued, "it's caused quite a stir in Washington. Congressional committees are being formed as we speak. The entire Black Project program is being shut down and investigated." "What happens to Scout now?" Eli asked, his arms tightening protectively around the dog's neck. Colonel Martinez smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm expression Sarah had seen from any government official that night. "That depends. What do you want to happen to him?" "He stays with us," Eli said immediately. "He's family." "Even though he's not entirely normal?" Colonel Martinez asked carefully. Sarah thought about everything they had learned that night. Scout's artificial intelligence, his genetic modifications, his military training, his ability to make choices that defied his programming. None of it changed the most important fact. "He chose us," Sarah said simply, "and we choose him." Colonel Martinez nodded, as if that was exactly the answer she had been hoping for. "Good. Because legally speaking, Scout never existed. Project X-47 has been classified beyond top secret and sealed permanently, which means this is just a family who found a lost dog and decided to keep him." The relief Sarah felt was so overwhelming that she started to cry. Real tears, the first she had shed since her husband's death. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of joy, of gratitude, of hope for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the backyard of their new house, watching Eli and Scout play fetch in the fading afternoon light. They had moved away from Cedar Hills to a bigger town where anonymity was easier and neighbors were less likely to ask awkward questions. Scout looked completely different now. His coat was thick and glossy, his wounds had healed completely, and he had gained enough weight to look like a normal, healthy German shepherd. More importantly, he acted like a normal dog most of the time. He barked at squirrels, begged for table scraps, and slept at the foot of Eli's bed every night. But sometimes, Sarah caught glimpses of what he really was. The way he could open doors that should have been impossible for a dog to operate. The way he seemed to understand complex conversations and respond accordingly. The way he watched the news with an intensity that suggested he understood exactly what was being reported. The congressional hearings had been front-page news for weeks. The Black Project program had been completely dismantled, its funding redirected to ethical research initiatives. Several high-ranking officials had been arrested, though Agent Williams wasn't among them. According to Colonel Martinez, he had agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence and psychiatric treatment. He was as much a victim as Scout was, she had explained to Sarah during one of their follow-up meetings. Just a different kind of victim. Eli had returned to school and was thriving in ways that amazed his teachers. The selective mutism that had plagued him after his father's death was completely gone. He talked constantly now, mostly about Scout, but also about everything else that interested his curious 5-year-old mind. "Mommy, look!" Eli called from across the yard. Scout was sitting perfectly still, while Eli balanced a stick on his head. a trick that should have been impossible for any dog to perform. "Very impressive," Sarah called back, though she made a mental note to remind Eli about keeping Scout's more unusual abilities private. They had developed a cover story over the past few months. Scout was a retired police dog with some specialized training, which explained his occasional displays of unusual intelligence. Most people accepted the explanation without question, and those who didn't were satisfied with vague references to classified work that couldn't be discussed in detail. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than anyone could imagine. Scout was exactly what Eli had said from the beginning: family. Everything else, all the genetic modifications and cybernetic enhancements and psychological conditioning, was just background noise. What mattered was love, loyalty, and the choice to be something more than what others expected. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Martinez. "How's our boy doing?" Sarah smiled as she typed back, "He's perfect, happy, healthy, and thoroughly spoiled." "Good, that's exactly what he deserves." Sarah pocketed her phone and walked over to where Eli and Scout were now engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation about the best strategy for catching tennis balls. Scout was listening intently, his head tilted to one side, occasionally offering a soft woof that Eli seemed to interpret as valuable input. "What are you two planning over here?" Sarah asked. "Scout thinks we should get a bigger ball," Eli explained seriously. "One that's easier to see when it's flying through the air." Sarah looked at Scout, who gazed back at her with those intelligent amber eyes. She had long since stopped being surprised by his insights into practical problems. "That sounds like good advice," she said. "We'll pick one up next time we're at the store." Scout's tail wagged approvingly, and Eli threw his arms around the dog's neck in a hug that Scout accepted with the patience of someone who had learned to treasure every moment of affection. That evening, as Sarah tucked Eli into bed, he asked the question that had become part of their nightly routine. "Mommy, do you think Scout dreams about the bad place?" Sarah sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed his hair back from his forehead. It was a question she had wondered about herself many times. "I think," she said carefully, "that Scout dreams about the good things now, about playing in the yard and sleeping in a warm house and knowing that he's loved." "I think so too," Eli said sleepily. "Sometimes I wake up and he's wagging his tail in his sleep. Happy dreams." Scout was indeed sleeping at the foot of Eli's bed, curled up on the soft blanket Sarah had bought specifically for him. As they talked, his ears twitched occasionally, and his paws moved slightly, as if he was running through pleasant fields in his dreams. "Do you think there are other dogs like Scout?" Eli asked. "Other ones who need families?" It was another question Sarah had thought about often. According to Colonel Martinez, Scout had been unique, the only successful prototype in a program that had produced mostly failures. But Sarah wasn't entirely convinced that was true. In a government complex big enough to create something like Scout, there had probably been other experiments, other attempts, other successes that hadn't been officially recorded. "I don't know," Sarah said honestly, "but if there are, I hope they find families who love them as much as we love Scout." Eli nodded seriously, as if filing away this information for future consideration. "If we ever find one, we should help them too." "Of course we will," Sarah promised, though she secretly hoped they would never have to face another situation like the one that had brought Scout into their lives. She kissed Eli goodnight and was about to leave when Scout lifted his head and looked directly at her. In his amber eyes, she saw gratitude so profound it took her breath away. Gratitude for the second chance, for the family who had chosen him, for the freedom to be something more than a weapon. "Good night, Scout," she whispered. Scout's tail gave a gentle wag, and he settled back down beside Eli's bed. Guardian, protector, friend, family member. He was all of those things and more, but most importantly, he was free to choose which role to play at any given moment. As Sarah turned off the light and closed the door, she heard Eli's sleepy voice one more time. "I love you, Scout." And from the darkness came a soft sound, barely audible but unmistakably real. It might have been a sigh of contentment, or the whisper of a tail against a blanket, or something else entirely. But Sarah chose to believe it was Scout's way of saying, "I love you too." Outside, the night was peaceful and quiet, filled with the normal sounds of a neighborhood settling down for sleep. No helicopters, no mysterious vehicles, no threats lurking in the shadows. Just a family safe in their home, grateful for the unexpected gift that had brought them together and healed them all in ways they hadn't known they needed to be healed. The story could have ended there, with the perfect picture of domestic tranquility. But life, Sarah had learned, rarely offered such simple endings. There were always complications, always new challenges, always unexpected developments that changed everything just when you thought you had figured it all out. The first sign that their peaceful life was about to be disrupted again came 2 weeks later, in the form of a newspaper article that made Sarah's blood run cold. Military Research Facility reports another security breach, the headline read. Authorities investigating possible connection to recent congressional hearings. Sarah read the article 3 times, her hands shaking more with each reading. The facility was different from the one where Scout had been created, but the circumstances were eerily similar. Something had escaped, something valuable, something that the military was desperately trying to recover without publicity. That night, Sarah found herself standing at Eli's bedroom door, watching her son sleep peacefully while Scout kept his eternal vigil at the foot of the bed. The dog's ears were pricked, alert even in sleep, as if some part of him was always listening for danger. As if sensing her presence, Scout lifted his head and looked at her. In his amber eyes, she saw the same worry that was gnawing at her own heart. They both knew that their peaceful interlude was probably coming to an end. Somewhere out there, another lost soul was running through the darkness, looking for sanctuary, and somehow, Sarah was certain that their path would lead to the same place Scout's had, to a family willing to choose love over fear, hope over safety, and freedom over control. The question was whether they would be ready when that moment came. Scout stood up carefully, making sure not to disturb Eli, and padded quietly over to where Sarah stood. He pressed against her leg, offering comfort and reassurance in the way that had become as natural as breathing. "Whatever comes next," Sarah whispered, "we'll face it together." Scout's tail wagged once, a soft sound of agreement in the darkness. They were family now, bound by something stronger than genetics or law or government programs. They were bound by choice, and that was something no one could take away from them. Do you believe some bonds are stronger than the forces trying to break them? What would you sacrifice for family? The call came at 3 in the morning, jerking Sarah from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. The shrill ring of her phone cut through the darkness like a knife, and she knew before she even answered that their quiet life was about to change again. "Sarah, it's Colonel Martinez. I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a situation." Sarah sat up in bed, her heart already racing. What kind of situation? The kind that involves a 12-year-old girl named Lucy Chen and something that shouldn't exist but apparently does. Colonel Martinez's voice was tight with stress. "I'm sending you a photo. Tell me if it looks familiar." Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming message. When she opened the image, her breath caught in her throat. The creature in the photo looked like a wolf, but wrong somehow, too intelligent, too purposeful, too human in its amber eyes that were achingly familiar. "Another prototype," Sarah whispered. "That's what we think. This one escaped from a different facility 3 days ago. Unlike Scout, she's not alone. She's traveling with a little girl who was a patient at a nearby children's hospital. The girl has been missing for the same 3 days." Sarah's mind raced. Missing or rescued? That's what we're trying to figure out. The girl, Lucy, has been receiving experimental treatment for a rare genetic condition, the same condition that made her a perfect candidate for their next phase of testing. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. They weren't just experimenting on animals anymore. They were moving on to human subjects, children. "Where are they now?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Headed in your direction. Sarah, I think this prototype knows about Scout somehow. I think she's bringing the girl to safety, the only place she knows might exist." Sarah looked toward Eli's room, where Scout was undoubtedly already awake and alert, sensing the change in the household's energy, even through walls and closed doors. "What do you need from us?" "I need you to be ready. This prototype, she's not like Scout. According to the files we've recovered, she was designed for a different purpose. Search and rescue operations in hostile environments. She's faster, stronger, and significantly more aggressive when protecting someone under her care." "But she's bringing a child to safety," Sarah said. "That sounds like the programming worked exactly as intended." "Yes, but the people who created her don't see it that way. They want both subjects back for immediate termination. They're calling it a containment failure that threatens national security." Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that had become her constant companion when dealing with the people who created these situations. The only threat to national security is letting them continue to exist. Agreed, but right now, our priority is protecting a little girl and the creature who risked everything to save her. After Colonel Martinez hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness for several minutes, trying to process what she had just learned. Another prototype, another child in danger, another impossible situation that somehow led to their door. A soft sound from the hallway made her look up. Scout was standing in her doorway, his amber eyes reflecting the dim light from her phone screen. He had heard everything, of course, and from his alert posture, she could tell he was already preparing for what was coming. "You know, don't you?" Sarah whispered. "You know she's coming." Scout padded quietly into her room and sat beside her bed. When he looked up at her, she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before. Not just intelligence or understanding, but hope. Desperate, profound hope. "She's like you," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "She's alone and scared and looking for a place where someone might understand." Scout's tail wagged once, confirming her guess. Then he stood and walked to the window, positioning himself where he could watch the street. Waiting. Sarah got dressed quickly and went to check on Eli, who was sleeping peacefully in his bed, unaware that their lives were about to change again. She stood in his doorway for a long moment, watching the steady rise and fall of his breathing, trying to memorize this moment of peace before the storm arrived. When she returned to her room, Scout was still at the window, but his posture had changed. He was no longer waiting. He was watching something specific. Sarah joined him at the window and peered out into the pre-dawn darkness. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then, gradually, she began to make out shapes moving between the houses across the street. Not random movement, but purposeful, careful progress that spoke of military training and desperate urgency. Two figures emerged from the shadows and crossed the street directly toward their house. One was clearly the wolf-like creature from the photo, moving with fluid grace despite what appeared to be multiple injuries. The other was a small human figure, a child who walked with the careful steps of someone who had been sick for a long time. And Scout moved away from the window and headed for the front door. Sarah followed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. When Scout reached the door, he sat down and waited, as if he knew exactly what protocol to follow for welcoming refugees. The knock, when it came, was soft and hesitant. Not the authoritative pounding of Agent Williams and his team, but the tentative tap of someone who hoped for help, but expected rejection. Sarah opened the door slowly, keeping the chain lock engaged at first. On her porch stood a little girl with dark hair and enormous brown eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone so young. Beside her, the prototype sat perfectly still, amber eyes fixed on Sarah's face with an intensity that was both unnerving and oddly familiar. "Are you Scout's mom?" the little girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question caught Sarah completely off guard. "How do you know about Scout?" "Luna told me," the girl replied, gesturing to the creature beside her. "She said Scout was free now. She said maybe we could be free too." Sarah looked at Luna, the prototype who had somehow known about Scout's existence, and guided this child across hundreds of miles to find the one place where they might be safe. The wolf creature's amber eyes held the same desperate hope Sarah had seen in Scout's when he first arrived. "My name is Lucy," the little girl continued. "I'm sick, and the doctors wanted to make me into something else. Luna saved me." Sarah's heart clenched. She unlocked the chain and opened the door fully. "Come inside, both of you." As soon as the door closed behind them, Scout appeared from the hallway where he had been waiting. The reunion between the two prototypes was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. They didn't rush toward each other or make sounds of greeting. Instead, they approached slowly, carefully, as if they couldn't quite believe the other was real. When they finally touched, nose to nose in the center of Sarah's living room, something extraordinary happened. Both creatures began to make sounds that weren't quite growls or whimpers, but something else entirely. It sounded almost like communication, like a language that existed somewhere between animal instinct and artificial intelligence. Lucy watched the exchange with knowing eyes. "Luna's been alone for a long time," she explained to Sarah. "She never knew there were others like her who chose to be good." "Chose to be good," Sarah repeated, struck by the child's phrasing. "Is that how you see it?" Lucy nodded seriously. "The doctor said Luna was broken because she wouldn't hurt people who didn't deserve it. They said I was broken too because my body doesn't work right. But Luna says being different isn't the same as being broken. The wisdom in those words, spoken by a 12-year-old who had clearly seen too much, made Sarah's eyes water. She knelt down to Lucy's level, noting the pale skin and slight tremor that spoke of serious illness. "How long have you been traveling together?" 3 days, Lucy said. "Luna carried me most of the way when I got too tired to walk. She found food and water and safe places to sleep. She saved my life." Sarah looked at Luna, who was still engaged in quiet conversation with Scout. The prototype was larger than Scout, built for different purposes, but she carried herself with the same careful dignity that spoke of intelligence choosing to be gentle. "Why did she save you?" Sarah asked. Lucy's expression grew thoughtful. "I think because she knew what it felt like to be trapped. The doctors were going to do experiments on both of us, make us into something we didn't want to be. But Luna chose to run, and she chose to take me with her." The sound of vehicles outside made everyone freeze. Sarah moved to the window and felt her stomach drop. Black SUVs were pulling up to her house, and figures in tactical gear were emerging from them with military precision. "They found us," Lucy whispered, her face going white with terror. But Scout and Luna had different reactions. Instead of cowering or preparing to flee, both prototypes moved to position themselves between the door and the humans they were protecting. Their body language was calm but determined, ready for whatever came next. "It's okay," Sarah said, recognizing the lead figure emerging from the vehicles. "That's Colonel Martinez. She's one of the good ones." The knock that followed was firm but respectful, and when Sarah opened the door, Colonel Martinez entered with only one aide, leaving the rest of her team outside. "Mrs. Chen, Miss Lucy," the colonel said, addressing the child with the same respect she would show an adult. "We've been very worried about you." "You're not taking us back," Lucy said, her young voice filled with surprising strength. "Luna and I won't go back to being experiments." Colonel Martinez knelt down to Lucy's level, her expression gentle but serious. "That's not why we're here. The facility where you were being held has been shut down. The people responsible are in custody. You're safe now." Lucy looked skeptical. "What about Luna? What happens to her?" Colonel Martinez glanced at Luna, who was watching the conversation with obvious understanding. "That depends. What do you want to happen to her?" "I want her to stay with me," Lucy said immediately. "She's my family now." Sarah felt a familiar tug at her heartstrings, the same words Eli had spoken about Scout, with the same fierce certainty that transcended logic or convention. "There might be a problem with that," Colonel Martinez said carefully. "Luna is considerably more advanced than Scout was. Her modifications are more extensive, her capabilities more pronounced. Some people might consider her dangerous." "She's not dangerous," Lucy said firmly. "She's protective. There's a difference." Scout moved closer to Luna, pressing against her side in what was clearly a gesture of support and solidarity. Luna's expression softened, and for a moment, she looked less like a military prototype and more like what she really was, a lonely creature who had found others who understood her. "What kind of modifications?" Sarah asked, her nurse's training making her curious about the extent of Luna's alterations. Colonel Martinez consulted a tablet she had brought with her. Enhanced speed and strength, advanced sensory capabilities, limited regenerative healing, and most significantly, enhanced cognitive processing that borders on what we might consider artificial intelligence. "She's smarter than Scout?" Eli's voice came from the hallway, where he had apparently been listening to the conversation. He approached the group slowly, his eyes fixed on Luna with fascination rather than fear. "Different kind of smart," Colonel Martinez said. "Scout was designed for infiltration and intelligence gathering. Luna was designed for search and rescue in hostile environments. She can process multiple environmental factors simultaneously and make complex decisions based on incomplete information." "That sounds like what she did when she saved Lucy," Sarah observed. "Exactly. The problem is that saving Lucy wasn't part of her programming. It was a choice she made independently, which according to her creators should have been impossible." Eli had reached Luna and was standing directly in front of her, studying her with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. Luna looked back at him with equal intensity, as if she was trying to understand this small human who showed no fear of her. "Hi," Eli said simply. "I'm Scout's boy. Are you Lucy's wolf?" Luna's response was to lower her head until she was at Eli's eye level and make a soft sound that was clearly meant as a greeting. When Eli reached out to touch her head, she remained perfectly still, allowing the contact with the same patient grace Scout had shown during their first meeting. "She likes you," Lucy said, smiling for the first time since she had arrived. "Luna doesn't usually let strangers touch her." "Maybe I'm not a stranger," Eli said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes displayed. "Maybe we're all family now." Colonel Martinez watched this interaction with obvious interest. "How long has Lucy been sick?" she asked Sarah quietly. "I don't know the details," Sarah replied, "but from what I can see, she needs medical attention soon." "The experimental treatment she was receiving was actually helping her condition," Colonel Martinez said. "The problem was that the doctors wanted to use her recovery to test human prototype bonding protocols." Sarah felt sick. They were planning to bond her to Luna permanently? Something like that. Create a human prototype team that could be deployed for military operations. A child and her loyal companion, perfect for situations where normal soldiers might seem threatening. The callousness of it took Sarah's breath away. Using a sick child and a modified creature as weapons, all while convincing themselves they were advancing medical science and military capabilities. "That's not going to happen now," Colonel Martinez continued. "But Lucy does need ongoing medical care, and Luna needs somewhere safe to stay while we figure out her legal status." "They can stay here," Sarah said without hesitation. "Both of them." Colonel Martinez smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Legally speaking, Luna never existed, just like Scout, and Lucy needs a foster family while her legal guardians are being investigated for their role in the experimental program." Lucy looked up at Sarah with hope shining in her brown eyes. "You'd really let us stay?" "Of course," Sarah said, kneeling down to hug the little girl. "We know what it's like to need a safe place to heal." That evening, Sarah found herself in the surreal position of preparing dinner for 2 children and 2 highly modified prototypes who were technically classified as non-existent. Luna had proven to be remarkably well-behaved, following Scout's lead in adapting to domestic life. But there were differences that reminded Sarah constantly of what Luna really was. She moved with predatory grace even when playing with the children. Her senses were so acute that she reacted to sounds and scents that no one else could detect. And her intelligence was clearly far beyond anything that should have been possible in a creature that was supposed to be an animal. "She's beautiful," Eli said, watching Luna play gentle tug-of-war with a rope toy, "but different from Scout." "Different how?" Sarah asked. Eli considered the question seriously. "Scout thinks like a person who chose to be a dog. Luna thinks like a wolf who chose to be a person." The observation was so astute that Sarah had to pause in her dinner preparations. Eli was right. Scout had retained his essential dog nature despite his modifications. Luna seemed to have transcended her wolf heritage to become something entirely new. Lucy, who had been quiet during dinner, finally spoke up as they were finishing dessert. "The doctor said Luna was the perfect prototype because she could think like a human but fight like a predator. They said she was the future of military operations." "What do you think she is?" Sarah asked gently. Lucy looked at Luna, who was lying peacefully beside Scout near the fireplace. Both prototypes were clean and well-fed, their injuries healing, their amber eyes bright with contentment. "I think she's my guardian angel," Lucy said simply. "The doctors tried to make her into a weapon, but she chose to be my protector instead." That night, as Sarah tucked both children into Eli's room, they had insisted on staying together, she marveled at how quickly their household had adapted to its new members. Scout and Luna had worked out their own protocol for protecting the house, taking turns on watch duty with the efficiency of a military unit. But it was the gentleness they showed with the children that truly amazed her. Both prototypes seemed to understand that Lucy was more fragile than Eli, requiring different kinds of care and attention. Luna positioned herself where she could monitor Lucy's breathing throughout the night, while Scout maintained his usual post beside Eli's bed. "Are you happy they came?" Eli whispered in the darkness. "Yes," Sarah whispered back. "Are you?" "Yes." Luna was lonely, and Lucy needed a family. Now nobody has to be alone anymore. From the living room came the soft sounds of Scout and Luna communicating in their strange, half-animal language. They were sharing information, Sarah realized, stories of their experiences, their fears, their hopes for the future. 2 creatures who had been created as weapons, choosing instead to be guardians. Two children who had been marked as experimental subjects, finding safety in the love of a makeshift family that shouldn't have been possible, but somehow was. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the peaceful sounds of her expanded household settling down for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about how to integrate Luna and Lucy into their lives permanently. But tonight, everyone was safe, everyone was loved, and everyone had chosen to be something better than what the world had tried to make them. In the morning, she would call the school to arrange enrollment for Lucy. She would schedule medical appointments to ensure the little girl received proper care for her condition. She would figure out how to explain to neighbors why their family had suddenly grown by 2. But all of that could wait. Right now, it was enough to know that 4 lost souls had found each other and chosen to become something that transcended their individual origins. They were family now, bound not by genetics or law or government programs, but by the simple decision to love and protect each other no matter what the cost. The last thing Sarah heard before falling asleep was the sound of Lucy's soft laughter, as Luna apparently told her a bedtime story, in the wordless language that existed between protectors and those they chose to guard. If you could choose your family, who would you pick and why? Share your thoughts about what makes a real family.